the program both. Vanessa, we're going to get started with the Middle East and, the new port that's being built. Is it being built really for humanitarian purposes?
In my opinion, and in the opinion of Gazans, particularly friends of mine now that have been displaced to the south in Rafah, no. But that shouldn't come as any surprise, of course. This is basically an EU, UAE, US project, ostensibly, as von der Leyen has said, to open a humanitarian corridor, despite the fact, of course, there are land crossings that could easily be used if Israel and Egypt were to open them to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. This plan now is being hijacked by Netanyahu in the Israeli media in just the next slide. Diplomatic source, this is in Jerusalem Post, Gaza maritime route was Netanyahu's idea. This is an exclusive. And in the article itself, what does it actually tell us? So it talks about Israel Katz. Now, the foreign minister had drawn up plans for a maritime route via Cyprus involving a floating island. One of the complicating factors with the maritime route was the absence of a port in Gaza big enough to handle cargo ships. Here is where obviously the US comes in. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, together with the Navy commander, the head of the coordination for Gaza itself, were briefed Sunday on the work needed to establish a naval pier. However, I'm not the only one to have concerns about the true purpose of this plan. This was only, I think, 2 weeks after October the 7th. There was, in fact, leaked in Israeli media a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza, not only to Egypt, but specifically to European countries that would be prepared to take in Palestinian refugees. And a recent report regarding the port in Anadolu, the US port plans in Gaza have hidden objectives. And this is a Jordanian expert talking about a floating port off the shores of Gaza is a humanitarian facade hiding voluntary migration to Europe and undermines the enclave's sovereignty. He goes on to point out the fact that also any humanitarian aid coming in will not go directly to the American port in Gaza, but will go to the Ashdod port in the occupied territories to be checked, and then sent under Israeli Navy control and drones to the Palestinian territory. And then interesting that in reality, of course, what many people are saying, this is an opportunity for the US to increase its military presence in what is effectively already its military outpost in the Middle East. 1,000 US troops deploying to build the offshore port for Gaza aid. And they're saying that it's going to take at least 2 months for this port to be finalized. And of course, in that time, we're already at famine situation in northern Gaza, and we're heading that way in central and southern Gaza. So 2 months, how many people are going to die in that time? And of course, what else undermines the idea that this is a humanitarian project by the United States? I think this was about 2 weeks after October the 7th. This was an article in The Intercept that talked about secret expansion of a secret military base, US military base in the Negev desert, about 20 kilometers from Gaza. And then added to that more recently, Haaretz, again, Israeli media, intelligence reveals unprecedented extent of US arms airlift, to Israel since October the 7th. The Biden administration has reportedly made 100 secret arms sales to Israel since the start of the Gaza war. So that's on top of the billions, of course, that have been poured into Israel to enable its genocide of Palestinians. Publicly available flight data shows exactly what happened. And so I think it's over 180 arms airlifts to Israel, the majority coming in from Qatar and Germany. So global bases, US strategic global bases, sending arms effectively under the radar of public knowledge, but picked up by flight radar, into basically the majority has gone into the Israeli Air Force base at Nevatim. And of course, we shouldn't forget that certainly the US and Israel and the EU and the UK and all the Gulf states have an interest in the natural gas reserves in the Levant Basin, which are in the range of 122 trillion cubic feet. And Gaza has never been permitted to actually exploit those reserves itself, and has been deprived of billions in income as a result. And then actually the sort of pilot boat, which is leaving Larnaca in Cyprus, left this morning. When I put this up yesterday, it hadn't left. It's bringing 200 tons of rice and flour, which should offer, interesting wording here, immediate relief to civilians in Gaza. It's coming from a Spanish NGO called Open Arms. But we have to bear in mind that in peacetime, so even before October the 7th, there were 500 trucks per day coming into the Gaza enclave. So we're talking there, 10,000 tons per day. So 200 tons is a drop in a very large ocean, as are, of course, the aid drops that are effectively Hollywood humanitarian aid for the Palestinians. So effectively, in my view, this port is very much a Trojan horse. And as I said, friends of mine have said they're expecting that once the work on the port has finished, the Rafah incursion will begin. So what they're saying is that it will take 2 months. The starvation will continue. After 2 months, the Rafah incursion by Israel will continue. And the survivors from that incursion will be potentially driven into Egypt or forcibly deported by ship by the Americans to whichever European port is prepared to take them in.
Thank you, Vanessa. I just want to end this segment. Maybe you'll have a comment on this. There was a graph going around social media. I'm not sure what the source of it was. It may have been Al Jazeera, but I looked at the figures, I checked them, and so I just wanted to show what this was. So first of all, it was looking at the number of children killed in war, and in 2019, something around 4,000. This is across the entire planet, of course. In 2020, that looks like another 2,000 or so. In 2021, about the same. And in 2022, about the same. So in those 4 years, the number, according to the United Nations, was 12,193. And just to put that in perspective, since October the 7th in Gaza, the current number, and although that the Israelis, of course, would dispute that because it's come from the Gazan authorities, is 12,300. But I think, Vanessa, just very briefly, that puts this whole thing in a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was watching Scott Ritter yesterday, who made a very interesting point. He said that what has caused such an awakening about the Palestinian cause is the fact that these 13,000, 14,000 children, whatever the number is, it's horrific, has been, they've been massacred in a very short time scale. Thousands of children have died at the hands of Israel since 1948. But because that's spread out over a very long time span, people are not as horrified as they have been, of course, by this genocidal campaign in Gaza in particular.
Yeah, thank you.